Thank you very much for coming. This is the final event of our exhibition, which has been running since January. But in fact, it hasn't been running since January. It's been running since early last year, because this final exhibition that we're having in London is a kind of the final stage of three exhibitions that were held. First one in Addis Abeba in April. The second one was in Johannesburg in July, August. And the third one was in Accra in Ghana in November. And this final exhibition pulls parts of those three original exhibitions together and makes something out of them, which is new. And we have really delighted that we have the designers with us here. So Kukwa and I were the original curators of this exhibition, which came out of a research project at SOAS, which involved 5 researchers, Kukwa and myself, also Daniel Mulugeta, who's there, and 2 others who aren't with us today, unfortunately, but were both absolutely essential to the project. And the exhibition was meant to be a kind of an account of what we found, but it's turned into something, well, not completely different, but something which has gone off and sparked off in all sorts of different directions because of these guys here, who are the designers who we asked and have worked with to try and create these installations and these original exhibitions in South Africa, Ghana, and Ethiopia. So this is the first time they've all come together. And my colleague Amelia Odida from the Department of Politics has very kindly agreed to chair this event. I'm going to hand over to her. Just to say that when we finished, and we're probably about an hour and a half, probably about till 6:30, we're going to be having drinks downstairs in the gallery, and I hope that you'll all come and chat and mingle and have a drink and let your hair down, and it's Friday. Yes.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Julia, for the introduction and for having me. And it's great to see you all. And I just asked as well if this was the first time that you had all met as well. So it's really great that I get to be a part of it as well, because I'm not an architect or a designer or had much to do with the ASA project. But I do have an interest in art and politics and the transformation of data into other forms. And that's where I'd like to start with the first question. So when Julia and Kukwa approached all of you, I was informed that you had their data at hand. So you had photos, research, papers. They talked you through their project, and somehow you transformed it in different ways and looked at it differently as designers and architects. So I'd just like to ask you, perhaps we can go in one direction. What was your experience of dealing with this raw data, if you will, or when you heard of the project, what was your approach to managing it?
Can I suggest that also I'm afraid I very quickly jumped in without introducing people. So perhaps people could introduce themselves before they speak for the first time.
Of course.
Apologies.
Of course, it's strange to hold a mic that doesn't amplify. So I might speak louder than usual with the anticipation that this thing is going to amplify. So yes, thank you so much for hosting us and inviting us to be part of this project. So my name is Kensani Yurchok de Klerk, and I suppose maybe we say both of our names and then I contextualize us. Okay. No? Okay, so I'm Kensani. Ord and myself we're part of a bigger team that were invited by the ASA project to design the Johannesburg exhibition of Building Africa. We are part of a bigger group called Matri Architecture. Matri Architecture is an association based between South Africa and Switzerland, and what brings us together, we're a group of pluridisciplinary spatial practitioners, so not only architects, but we're also artists, we're urbanists, geographers, academics, and what brings us together is this desire to develop African spatial education, not necessarily within an institutional context. And so we do projects. We're a bigger group. We're 19, but on this project we were 4. And our 2 team members that would complete our group are unfortunately not here. So please know that we are representing them. Yes, Ord, would you like to introduce yourself before we answer this question together?
So my name is Otolo, and I'm an architecture student, and I'm based in London normally, and I'm part of Matri Architecture. And there's a bigger constellation, I think, as you're going to talk about.
Yes, so the question on how we dealt with all of this information when we received the brief from Julia and Kuku and the ASA team. I think for us, it was really, because we are pluridisciplinary spatial practitioners, we find it very interesting to find a mode of expression. A mode of expression that can be manifested through some sort of spatial product or output that could then articulate this research, which to a large extent, as we discussed at an earlier point, is tailored to an academic audience, right? So there's a lot of thorough, rigorous research that has been done about, in the case of our exhibition, the Union buildings in Pretoria and the Constitutional Court in Johannesburg. And when we received all of this information and research, a lot of it text heavy, we thought, okay, it takes a lot of time to do research. It probably takes a lot of time to ingest research. How do we make this into some sort of legible exhibition? And so that was really our starting point. And when we were reading through the information, the research, it really became clear to us that there were certain architectural protagonists that were appearing and recurring in the work. And as you'll see downstairs in the gallery, we started then to think about these buildings in fragments, in moments, in a way inviting whoever would visit the exhibition to get a little bit closer to the building. So you'll see podiums with books that then describe that archetype. You'll have doors, perhaps. You'll have a garden. You'll have a landscape. And that was really an attempt to sort of spatialize the research that we had been going through. But maybe, or you would want to say something more about the other manifestations, like the models and the books.
Yeah.
And the method.
So I think, like she mentioned, the different elements. So there's a few of them. So we have models that are made out of plaster, and the colors of those models are in relationship to two buildings that we decide to focus the exhibition on. So you have the Constitutional Court and the Union building. And what's interesting about both of them is their striking red colors, even though it's two different materials. So we try to represent that materiality in those models, and we decided to look at fragments because it seems like it's much more manageable. And also, like that, we embrace the subjectivity that comes from that. And also we looked at, so we made as well collages inside of those, I forgot to say, so it's different podiums. And then we made collages inside of those podiums, and it's another way of interpreting those research. And we also have a book on top of that. And so, again, I think why we decided to look at fragment is because we understand that we're spatial practitioners and not academics. And for us, it was a way to understand those research, and also it felt like it would be easier for people to engage with them, and it would be easier for them to have their own narratives as well. And we're inspired by Saidiya Atman and this idea of critical fabulation. So using fact to create narrative and embracing everyone's subjectivity. You own, and everyone can embrace their own subjectivity as well. So that's the way we decided to engage with, our limitation as well.
Okay, sure. Thank you. I'll pass it on to Nahom.
Hey. Thank you. My name is Nahom Teklu. Currently, I'm studying my master's in architecture at the University of Kent. I have been practicing architecture for the past 6 years in Addis and more. And I usually do curate exhibitions and festivals in Addis. So that's somehow about me. And about this project, you know that with exhibitions, usually if you are working with a photographer or a videographer, you have something visual to post it on the wall. So it's really easy to present. Your challenge will be how to present it as a curator and how to increase the experience. But with this project, it was more of it's a research project, purely academician, related to politics and how people perceive the power of architecture in embodying politics. So it was really different. And the material I received was a text, which which was pretty much different from the medium I was using to showcase in my previous work experiences. So I was really challenged by the point, how should I exhibit this to the public? Because as you can imagine, people are less interested in reading something like with exhibitions. So that was the big challenge. So instead of focusing on the content, I gave that major attention on the experience design. For me, be it curation, exhibition, museums, or even architecture, it's all about experience design. That's how the soul of my personal practice of architecture is shaped by. So with this challenge, I came up with the idea of giving the opportunity for more people, more voices, and more ideas to discuss and iterate on how we should represent and interpret these, concrete findings of the African state architecture using exhibition. So the first decision I made was to invite people. So this thing is, I was thinking it's about Africa. So like designing something by myself was not that much fair enough to deal with the project. So I invite people and architects, architecture students, and some prominent people in Ethiopia, and we sat for one full day. So we were iterating different possibilities and spatial arrangements on how to represent and how to come up with a better presentation of the findings of the African street architecture. Because some of the findings were really amazing. As I don't know if you all have heard it or not. Like during the movie screening, someone was saying the African Union, like he saw it as a snail, which is a befitting symbol of the oppression and then the identity or the oppression of the institution. So at some point, this has some interesting and at the same time sensitive topics which we should be serious of in communicating with the ideas. So I was more interested on the experience design part of it. So on that day, it was exactly last year on March 8th, it was Women's Day, and we went into a space and sat for one full day, and there were 89 people who applied to be part of that process, and we, according to due to different constraints, we selected 20 people. We tried to be as fair as possible, and we come up with 3 different layouts or designs by which we decided that the exhibition should go to the people rather than the people coming to the exhibition. So that's how we come up with the idea of a movable urban architecture or this umbrella-like structure. So instead of people going into exhibitions, this is something about, it's not something about stationary things. It's about dynamic things, ideas. And also, it's not something about a single building. It's about buildings in cities, buildings in countries, and buildings in a continental level. So we come up with this umbrella-like structure, which has this symbolic representation of belonging something and then containing an idea. Like as you can see, the geometry of the structure clearly depicts that there is something contained. And there is a notion of protection and a notion of, visual attraction towards it. So we come up with that structure. And after that, still designing the experience was somehow a challenge. So that's why we came up with the idea of using technology to increase the experience. So we contact with very seasoned augmented reality designers and 2D animators, and we invited them to be part of the process. And we had a long discussion with them. Some of the things were really hard to understand for them because they were, experienced in working with purely creative aspects of projects. But now this is something related to politics. And the source material was just a text. So that was a bit of a challenge. But after that, the exhibition was exhibited in 3 different places in Addis Abeba. So like every social class was getting the opportunity to deal and to see the exhibition in 3 different spaces, starting from the streets, from some semi-public spaces, to openly deal with, random passerbys on the street. So that's how we curated the exhibition. And after that, we were thinking, that like this process, the process I've told you earlier, is also something that we should exhibit. So we decided to come up with a digital museum or a website, which includes all the processes and also the Building Africa exhibition. So even if the exhibition is ended back in April, you can also attend the exhibition online, like simply from your phones at your home or wherever you are. So that was the process, and I think we will add some more pointers based on the questions.
I'll definitely ask you
Yeah.
some questions.
Thank you.
Okay, to Lois. Thank you.
My name is Lois Kwate. I'm an architect in Ghana, and I have been part of this research. In 2022, I helped Julia collect data and people's opinions regarding some of the selected buildings in the exhibition, mainly the Jubilee House and then the Osu Castle. So with us, so I didn't do this design on my own. I did it with my colleague architect, who is Augustine Owusu-Ansah. He's not here with us today. But then when we got the text or the material, there was text and images. And being very familiar with these buildings and knowing how Ghanaians relate to these buildings, Ghanaians are people who are really interested in stories and are people who like to share their opinions. So I personally had the idea of if the exhibition could work like an observatory. And Augustine thought it should be a form of storytelling using the spider, Anansi, who is known as a mischievous storyteller in Ghana. So we tried to merge these 2 ideas. First off, using the observatory. As architects, observatory has certain structural frames which are like lattice in the diagonal or diamond shapes, and then try to mimic the spider webs of Anansi. These were the 2 things we tried to merge to create our exhibition. And we wanted it to take a very participatory approach. So we engaged, the idea was to engage students we had worked with before in previous arts competitions from the Corpus Christi School. It's a junior high school in Ghana. So we had 10 students from the school, including their art and crafts teacher, who is Samuel Hemans, who was also a part of this. So how we thought of the process was, first we had to figure out how we were going to create those lattice structures. But then because the idea for the exhibition was to make it very mobile, so we wanted to create mobile, sort of like a mobile gallery. We approached it by having a maze. So our exhibition had 4 areas which work like a maze. So you walk through a corridor made from these wooden frames, and then the net structure is sort of like a representation of the lattice with the spider webs. You walk to one space into the other. And then we had one main space which was going to act as a place to collect participant opinions, because like I said, Ghanaians are people who really like to share their opinions. So that was something we wanted to highlight, where we had a portion in the exhibition where they would write their opinions and what they thought of these buildings, how they related with the buildings in time past. Yeah, so for us, that was the approach. And we tried to use very flexible materials. We made use of fishing nets to represent the lattice, and then we used yarns to weave the spider webs. And yeah, pretty much that was how we went about our exhibition. And also, we used the pictures we were given. Because we wanted it to look like the typical exhibition you go to, where the pictures are hanging, you look at them and then you are able to sit down and look at them and then form your notions. We use that same approach. So we had the pictures being hung within the frame of our fabric, basically, because also it's being a political exhibition. We said usually with politics, people say things based on the angle with which they are looking at it. It could be obscured, and you can't always have the same interpretation of the things we see happening in our political circles. So there we had the webs covering them, so you don't get to see the pictures completely. We sort of obscure it a bit, so then you can derive your own interpretation from it. So yeah, that's how we went about our exhibition in Accra.
Okay. Thank you. And before I ask Kuko and Julia a question, I wanted to see what it was like working with academics and researchers. Obviously, you did mention as well that some of you might identify as academics as well, but perhaps for some of you, there's a big distinction between architecture and what you do and academia and how we work. And so perhaps if you could just say a few words about the experience working with academics and people who consider themselves to be researchers first and foremost, and what that process was like. I'll start with same side as well. Thank you.
I now realize that I failed to mention that I myself am an academic. So I'm doing a PhD at the moment at the GETA, which is the Institute for History and Theory of Architecture at the ETH in Zurich. And within our team, I think that, Ord and I are within the academic world at the moment, in different constellations, and Tapiwa and Tseho are very much so designers. They're doing built projects. And so also within our team, there's this sort of, I wouldn't call it friction, I would say dynamic that allows us to have a room for critical feedback, and also to kind of have a checking mechanism as to whether certain research is actually legible and accessible through design. And so for us, working with Kukua and Julia was a pleasure. I think for us it was also very interesting to see at certain points of our when we had different iterations of our proposal, what deviated too far from the research, and also coming back to it, because of course when you're a researcher, there's a certain weight, certain aspects of that research are a bit heavier than others. And I think for us, also because of the nature of a timeline, we kind of go through things a bit faster and maybe tend to overlook some of the nuances that perhaps we ought to have brought out in the exhibition. So I think for us it was a very helpful kind of iterative process. We had very different versions, and I think that it is very helpful that we then kind of zoomed into the fieldwork material that was very present in the research around the union buildings and the constitutional court. So these extensive interviews with people, asking them about the experience of these buildings, was actually, I think, one of the key forces or key drivers that allowed us to then invite whoever would engage with our exhibition to do so by touching it. You have to open a book to look at a model. You can touch that model. Your fingers are then, they have a bit of the trace of that model on them. You leave your trace on the book, and you leave your opinion about the state of things in that book. So it was, in a way, inspired. Also, the experience of the exhibition was also inspired by the extensive and expansive fieldwork notes that we received in the research. But I don't know, Aud, because what do you think as a fellow academic and quasi? What do you think?
I think what was interesting was especially within our own team, because as Kenzani mentioned, I mean, it's because I'm not an academic, but I'm at a university at the moment, so we engage with a lot of similar discourse, especially with my university. So I think it was within our theme to see how practitioners and people that engage more about that with similar material react to it. I think it was just very interesting to have those different sides and how sometimes you will use certain vocabulary or you have certain ideas and the two other will be like, listen, this is not really accessible to everyone, right? And so it's very interesting to have this relationship within. And I feel like Kukua and Julia maybe are like part like specific academic, because yes, they will check like if we were going too far from the narrative, they will tell us maybe don't go that far. But we had a lot of freedom, I think, and having had experience with different academic, I think it's not always like this. So yeah, I guess it's on a case-to-case basis.
It was very diplomatic.
Yeah.
That's it. Do you want to speak on what was it like working with?
Yeah, I think I have to also be diplomatic.
You don't have to be diplomatic.
Yeah, because, you know, with this project, it feels like we got this privilege to see, because I have this book in my room which has the title of How to Read Buildings. So that was really, you know, that majors on the architectural interpretation of buildings. But with this project, it gives us a fresh view and a fresh narrative how, you know, power and state and politics, whether be it in a national or a continental level, can be dealt with the built environment in general. So this was something that we thought we were privileged to deal with, and that was a profound moment to see what people say about the building the building that they found in their vicinity, you know. So that was really a nice experience, and I think working with Kukua and Julia specifically, it was so. For me, even it was not more of as if a creative project which has so many discourses, you know, back and forths. I think I really like the idea that they trust us, you know. So it gave us that opportunity and freedom to somehow reinterpret the research in a way it can be easily chewed by the audience. So that was one thing. And with this research thing, so for me it was this thin line between publication and presentation. So research is usually about finding something and publishing it. But with this project, it went beyond that boundary. It went into a form of communicating the society and the end users of this research, and also the ones who powered this research about what they say and how they see the built environment. So it was more of an extra curricular way, which in a way gave the chance to go the research beyond publications and shelves. So I feel like we put the research from somewhere to a place where voices are democratized in urban areas in different parts of cities, the city specific to Addis. So that was really a nice experience. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
So for us, our experience working with Kukwa and Julia, we started by sending them our proposal, and because we are architects, we added sketches, so it was quite clear from the beginning. They didn't give us redos like we would usually see in the research setting, where you would write a proposal and there are corrections and you have to go over. I can't tell if that's because the sketches helped or because the ideas were very great, but then it was pretty straightforward from the start. So after they agreed to the idea, what we had to figure out next was how to go about in the building. And because they are researchers, they are pretty excited about a lot of things. So when we brought up the idea of talking to fishermen to figure out how to go about the weaving, they were open to it, like, let's go and see how that goes, even though we didn't go with that line, but then we had ideas from those interactions. And also when we had to settle on the site to use for our exhibition. So yes, it is a mobile exhibition, but because it was made of wooden frames, transporting them across the city would have taken a bit of time. So we had to discuss our locations with them. We had 4 locations in mind. We had 3 different locations on the Independence Square. And they being researchers, some of the challenges we faced whilst trying to get permits for the location was very familiar with them as to some of the things you face when you are trying to do things in Ghana. Yes. So they having that background and knowing the challenges on site also, they understanding it made things quite easy for us. So yes, I would say it was indeed an enjoyable process, and they understanding all the challenges made things quite easy. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Julia and Kukwa, you've heard from the designers what it was like working with you. What was it like working with the architects and designers? I'll start with Kukwa.
Also, full disclosure, I'm an architect myself. So, had experience with my own personal and community stubbornness as architects. But it was, I'd say that we're really lucky in who we worked with. And Nahum was the first, Nahum's was the first exhibition, and really set a great tone because he was like really enthusiastic right from the get-go with the ideas and everything. And we worked out some of the kinks early, so he was kind of our test, our test subject. And just from working with Nahum, like, for me, one of the things that came was we needed to establish trust and like sort of come from the point of view that we're not, no one's trying to like cheat the other or that kind of thing or like that kind of thing. So for example, with matriarchy, I remember there was this episode, I don't remember exactly what happened, but there was just like a kind of tension in the beginning. And I read that, and I was Julia and I had a conversation, and we had seen all their work. Like we saw what they did, we liked what they were about, how they presented themselves. But it was clear, and like this is something in the art space, right? Like this exploitation in the art space is just a thing, right? So people will try to take your work, not give you credit, cut you out of things. So some of the tensions, like from discussions and stuff, I was like, oh yes, what's happening? This is what we need to establish, that this is your thing. We're not going to have you just design a thing and claim credit for it, which is what some people do. So after this initial hiccups on various levels, establishing that trust and just coming from honesty and transparency, for me, I think it went kind of smoothly for there. And I'll say like Julia was also very, very trusting, because it was Julia's projects and Julia's money. She's the one that, it was your money. I mean, if the ERC were to want to arrest someone, it would be you. Not me. I'm in America. Yeah, they won't find me. But Julia's also really trusting. Even this idea of, because it came a long way from having photos on the wall with text, which would have been so simple. She would have done it in her sleep, and she would have written her report, and that was it. But trusting to do this thing, to have architects interpret it. Because I think for us as well, it's like your research is kind of your baby. I've not had a baby, so sorry to those who have had babies. But for me, it was kind of my baby. So there's this kind of thing, like having someone like have this different kind of view. Like when you hear back from a reviewer, and it's like, oh my, no, this is wrong, I'm right. And then into kind of like, okay, this is another view, this is the point of the work. And I say like it's pretty amazing. I keep saying, I know like I'm biased because I was in it, but it's pretty amazing how they all had different points of views, and just how great it really was, and how they focus on different things and just for me, I saw the work in ways I hadn't seen before. After all these years of talking to other researchers and reading, they just like all pick these like really thoughtful, impactful moments, and then like, yeah, brought it to life with their exhibitions.
Thank you. I don't know what I can add now, but I think one of the things, first of all, I just should point out that we did all this from 3 different continents. So Kukra was in America, I was here, and these guys were all in, well, actually not in necessarily in different continents. I mean, actually the matriarchy team was divided between Africa and bits of Europe, and then there was obviously Ethiopia and Ghana. So it was all online, and Kukra was absolutely right. And I think, I don't know if you guys, you've all been very polite, but I do think building trust was quite an important part of it. And I think also one of the things that this whole process has taught me, and it's been working with the team. So first of all, working with the research team, which I'd never done before, but working with colleagues who don't always agree with you, but have fantastic ideas, or maybe sometimes we all have rubbish ideas, but we share our ideas and we learn a lot from each other. And you begin to sort of realize how much more your research can be. But then when we stepped to this stage, when we actually handed over the research and saw it taken, and I think it was partly the artistic process. I think it was the way in which I mean, for me, these drawings, I needed a lot of help with them. I mean, Kukra had to explain them to me. I mean, I'm not a drawings person, I'm a words person. And all these guys are architects, and they don't deal with words, they like pictures, and I like words. And so that was a real revelation. But then actually seeing objects, seeing ideas emerge in these beautiful ideas for structures, for symbols, for bringing storytelling tradition, for bringing, these wonderful forms, brought the research into a completely different plane, I think. And I think one of the things that has made me very strongly is I've actually now see the research quite differently. I don't think that I see it in the same way at all. And I've done work in my actual research. I've worked in all 3 of these countries. So all of these guys took the results and thought about them rather differently. And I feel that we've had conversations, so it's always difficult to tell where one begins and the other stops and so on. But actually, it's become an enormously different kind of thing. And then I should just also say that one of the fantastic things about working with you all was the way that the shows could then be take the research back to the places where it came from. So, we had done this research in Ghana, Ethiopia, and South Africa, and also in other countries that are reflected in the museum, in the exhibition downstairs. And we'd sort of talked to people about these buildings, and then they'd been interpreted and shown in these extraordinary new ways. And then we had new audiences and old audiences coming back and having a look, and then putting another layer of thought on top. And I think the richness has been extraordinary. And I mean, actually, Kukra and I are very keen to write a book about the whole process, as well as our research, which I think also has benefited enormously from it.
Thank you, and I'll follow up from that point about the exhibition moving across different cities and countries. So it's been to Accra, Johannesburg, Addis Abeba, and now London. And of course, these countries are very different, have very different cultural contexts, geographies, climates, audiences. What was that change like, moving the exhibition around different cities? What were the differences in the ways audiences reacted? Or could you see shifts? And how, and what was that like? Start with Kukra.
So I'll start by saying Julia will be the best because she went to each one. I was kind of stuck in America. I didn't have my passport, couldn't move. But it was interesting with how, again, like once we had established the trust, like we knew that they knew the context they were working with and they knew their audiences and what to do. So one thing for me, it was really fascinating seeing kind of different approaches from the designers and then hearing about like when they opened and what's happened, just how right they were in the decisions we made. Because if it was left to, again, in earlier discussions about it, and I have to say now we had a great consultant, Helen Ikla, who's sitting in the audience, who was with us from the beginning, and she kept telling us, no books on walls, no walls of text. So she was very influential in us not having just printing our paper on the wall for you guys to read, which would not have been fun. Yeah. So we trusted them to lead and know where to put it, what form to put it, and how to draw in these audiences. And again, like very different experiences and results from that. With Johannesburg, one of the venues was part of this Keys Art Mile kind of thing, which kind of had different reactions, a different cross-section of society, which would probably, because when we're speaking, we're thinking of putting it at malls, when we're just going to do the pictures and the text, right? Which was like, would have been totally different and not have gotten that kind of engagement with people like flipping through the books and writing in the way that you had. And with Nahoma as well, taking it to these 3 different locations, and each location kind of attracted a different subset of people in Addis, and also in Accra. So Accra was in this car park, as Lois has mentioned, and it wasn't just the people who would come into the car park, but the way they designed it with the sort of semi-transparent walls was that people would even just pass by outside and kind of like stop a little and look and go on their way, because Accra is hot. Some people don't have time to stop. But yeah, it was like interesting on their part. But Julia will speak more because she was at each of them and actually talking to some of the people that visited.
Very happily, actually. So the highlights for me, because I mean, I'd turning up and wasn't quite sure what was going to happen and how it was going to work, and then in Addis Abeba, I remember this extraordinary structure, which is very beautiful. You can see the replica downstairs. The original was much taller and it was white and it was very dramatic. And people would arrive, and I'm sorry, I'm going to steal your line, Nahum. But Nahum's dad, in fact, was one of the guys who turned up and said, you know, where's the exhibition? And quite a few people said, where's the exhibition? And they didn't know where it was. And because Nahum had done this augmented reality thing, which he very kindly didn't say that I was the one that didn't understand it, but I didn't understand it till I got there. You know, there was nothing there. There was just this beautiful structure, and then these peculiar sort of indecipherable images on bits of card hanging in the air, and then you're meant to use your phone and scan them. And it was Nahum's dad who said it's like the exhibition's in the air. And a lot of people said that. I think one of the people called it an un-exhibition, didn't they? Because you didn't see what it was. You had to really sort of pull it out, and then it jumped through the air onto your phone. And so there was this sort of interest in that, and a lot of people came, and they were really intrigued by that whole process, and it did make me think about one of the things that was struck with in the research was how people in Addis didn't really want to talk about their buildings. They almost at one point, and in fact I'm going to sort of pursue this in my research, they're sort of almost as though the state buildings are invisible. You just don't look. And there was something that Nahum captured of the invisibility of the buildings in this extraordinary non-display. So that was amazing. In Johannesburg, then, I think one of the things that was very striking about the way that one worked was the number of people who almost, I mean, actually, I will say, I think a lot of people came and they thought the idea that they were making the exhibition was very important. And so you'll see in the comments, people really wrote a lot, and they wrote a lot of different kinds of things. Some of them were, you know, talking about happy memories, about unhappy memories, and making extremely rude comments about politicians, graffiti drawings. I think there's one picture in one of the union buildings, which is where the president works, of a toilet. You know, it was a kind of moment of a sort of joyful, but also kind of angry. A lot of it was anger, and but also this idea that actually this became the visitors exhibition, and these books they built up, and then people would spend a lot of time just reading the comments, actually. But that was what the exhibition was. So that was extraordinary. And then in Accra, this car park on Oxford Street's very busy, and the car park was actually, we were surrounded by a market for quite a lot of the time. And so it was a very sort of kind of ordinary setting. It was sort of like just part of normal life, people coming doing their shopping. And then they would see this weird structure with these spider webs and come over and have a look. And what I particularly loved was the way in which people just made it their home. So people used to come and sit and eat their lunch in it. And then at one point, it seemed to be turning into a hair salon when there was these young women were doing each other's hair because there was a bench. And you're right. And it was also for me as a non-architect, I began to understand tropical architecture better because it was really hot. But in this structure, which had a roof, you obviously didn't have the sun directly, but you also, because it was beautiful ventilation with the spider webs, I began to really appreciate, because Kuka is always going on about this, and she's always saying that we don't do ventilation properly here. But now I understand. And again, in Accra, as Lois pointed out, people do like to have their opinions. So there were, again, a lot of people very keenly writing comments, and again, quite a lot of very rude comments, and then quite a lot of, actually the one thing that happened in Accra, which was quite fun, was that there would be conversations like graffiti in toilets. You'd have somebody leaving a comment, and then somebody else would comment on the comment, and then somebody else would comment on the comment, and you'd have these whole conversations over the days that went on and on and on. So I sort of, I think one of the Anansi theme, the idea of spinning stories and stories spinning in different directions, and the way in which in Ghana, you have this sort of healthy or maybe unhealthy sometimes disrespect of authority. You don't suffer fools and you don't suffer people in power. That's gently, do you, really? And that really was part of that sort of absolutely emerged very strongly in the exhibition.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to maybe just ask one more question before we open it up to the audience. I just want to ask the designers what you thought of each other's installations and designs when you saw them. What did you think?
Can you start on that side?
Yeah. There you go. Yes.
Okay, so when I entered and saw the podium, I wasn't sure what to look at from the beginning, but then sitting down to watch the video, I saw there was a mirror showing me a portion of the model. So then I stood up and looked at it. I'm like, okay, I'm seeing something differently on the top, but then the mirror was doing a good job by showing me what was inside, which I thought was very interesting. And then I did go through the comments. I'm sure if we had taken that approach in Ghana, people would have filled the books, which was a very good thing. So I like the difference that brought, like having taking bits of elements of the building instead of the entire structure. I thought that was very interesting. And then also with the tila, right? Yeah. Not the umbrella. With the tila, which I liked that actually as that structure could sit anywhere, and it's a representation of a mobile architecture. I was telling Kukwa, if we can take it to Ghana and just leave it somewhere, you'd come back and there'll be people seated and making use of it, and knowing the exhibition is always with it, all you have to do is scan. I thought that was very innovative, yes.
I think one of the most important ways that architecture can be communicated is to have some physical things. So I really like the idea of putting building models and allowing people to touch it and to actually interact with it, so that they can, in a way, feel it and also put their imprints on the model. So that was really a profound interpretation of, this putting, a monumental thing for people to actually interact with the exhibition. That's one thing. And the other thing, with the spider web, it's really, it feels fresh. I don't know, when I see it, it feels fresh, even if it's housed in that room, in this room here, it feels fresh. So it has this visual representation of something freshness, even if, like, I can't imagine how it felt in the streets of Accra. You know, it is somehow that pulls people, create attention, you know, so that's an important part when it comes to exhibiting pieces of this academic research into, like, for the public. So that was really profound in the monumentality aspect, which both of the versions in Johannesburg and Accra shares. That's a really profound interpretation.
Thank you. And I'll pass it on to Aude.
I think what's quite nice about all of them, and Julia, I think you mentioned it, is like it feels like we designed them, we talked together, and then we designed it, because there's the strong participatory component to all of them. Quite obviously, in both of us, where people can write, and I think the virtual reality as well. There's something very nice about it, and for the two of them, it's elements that are very specific to the place, but that could be interpreted like throughout the continent. For example, what's the name? The Tila. Again, you say you could bring it to Ghana, but even I'm as a West African for Burkina Faso, this idea of having a central, like a tree in the middle, and people come and talk together, or the hotline. The hotline, in South Africa as well. So this very striking element that could be reinterpreted to the continent, I find it very interesting. And it's a very beautiful object as well. And for the Anansi Playhouse, when I just saw I didn't know the title of the exhibition, but when I saw the web, my first idea was that it was about Anansi. And so this idea of storytelling is quite interesting, and how people can reinterpret that as well, and how the visual language, you don't necessarily need to read about the exhibition to understand what it's about, and I think this is something that's quite successful. And the fact that children made that, so another layer of participatory, from a young age, they can talk about something academic, they can participate in shaping academic research. And I wonder later on if it's something they'll remember and, I don't know, talk about. So.
I completely agree and follow Aude on the participatory element. I think that it was really special to see that in all of our exhibitions there was this desire to privilege the presence of the person who would be there in some way or another. And what struck me, I have to say, because I think in learning about both of the exhibitions in Addis and in Accra, is in comparison to ours, I was thinking to myself, it would be interesting to understand the politics of exhibition making, because you guys did them outside, and we did it inside, and we did it inside because there were so many concerns as to the longevity of that. How would we manage it outside if we were to do it outside? Lots of conversations that come up, and it was really inspiring. It is very inspiring to see how there seems to be this sort of user-based ownership in both of those contexts, where people were keen and in the position to leave their trace, but also respectful of that space. And I think that comes to the design. In the Tila, it's really like an Imbizo. You're really encouraged to be underneath that space. It's indeed so sculptural, so beautiful. And in the case of the Playhouse, it's also got this porous and gentle boundary, so you don't feel, it's almost like that curtain between the that curtain between the kitchen and the lounge, you know, that appears across many geographies in the African continent. So there's this sensitivity to creating a room, and I think that was really something that I was very struck by in both of in both cases, in Addis and in Accra. So it's a beautiful to experience.
To me, of you commenting on each other's is very.
Thank you. All right, I think it's time for me to withhold any more questions and open it up to the audience. If not, I'll happily keep going, but I'm sure that there are people that want to ask the designers or Julie and Kukwa some questions as well. Yes, at the back. One second, do I pass the mic at this stage?
No.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your exhibition, and thank you for the talk. It's really fantastic and great to see all the work. My question has more to do with, I suppose that I'm a designer, and I just wondered to all the designers that were working in a different context, because the exhibition is called Building Africa, and I wondered, because you've got amazing feedback from people participating with the exhibitions that are on display. I wondered whether you got designer's itch and wondered, what would I do in this stead? You're talking about very important architectural spaces in these nations, and I wondered if there was any sort of propositional aspect to it that could push you a bit further. Going outside of the remit of, or the scope of perhaps what you were doing, yeah.
Is that directed to the designers? Yeah. Does anyone want to start? Yeah. No.
I think that's an interesting question. So in our case, it's the process. It's not something that we pre-decided. It's something that we, each and every time tweaked, iterated, and so everything was made through the process. So someone was coming in, talking about how it should be covered, whether it should be steel or not, whether, like, what kind of representation should it have? Should we make it something like an African fabric to cover this umbrella-like structure, and what we should do?
I'm not sure if that was the question. Do you mean if they want to redesign the buildings that we studied?
I think so, yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I just want to start from, So the process redefined everything. So for me, I feel like I have to be, conserved from dealing into such kind of engagement, because we should really know about the process, because it's the process which gave birth to the end product. And as you can imagine, I am very familiar with the process in Addis, which my colleagues are also familiar with their respective locations. So we really need to understand the process first to have a say on how to, better or advance them in a way that we think will be better. I think we all did like the best thing.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Sani?
So there is a national election happening in South Africa this year, and a lot of people are angry. A lot of people have a lot of energy, and I think that, and we were discussing earlier, like, it would have been so interesting to have, exhibited this just before the election and just after, to see what ideas people have about the state of things, the state of the state, the state of these buildings. And I think the reason I say that, or I sort of paint this context, is because I think that when reading the comments, and also when we were designing the exhibition, it did come, you allow yourself to think about what could you do with such buildings, but more from the perspective of how to deal with traces from the past that are incredibly not only traumatizing, but creating a sense of inadequacy is what someone said at one of our talks. You know, a man who was in his 20s when apartheid ended and said, that building made me feel adequate. And it's the same building that Nelson Mandela gave his first speech as president of a democratic South Africa. So every time we went, when we also visited these buildings as a team, and we were in the last push of setting up the exhibition, I certainly thought to myself how to deal with preservation when you're dealing with so many difficult elements around trauma, around very difficult histories, but at the same time you don't want to erase and forget. So I didn't necessarily think about it concretely in terms of, okay, it would look like this, but certainly how do you open up? You know, we never saw the amphitheater, but we modeled it. We modeled it to scale. We found fragments and we studied things from research, from images, from Google, from whatever material we could find, but we never actually got to go to that building to check it out. And I mean, that would be one first incredible step, to open up, I'm talking about the union buildings in this case, open up the union buildings. Because people use it, you know, the landscape, people use it, they go there. It's apparently the best place to take your first date when you're a teenager these days. There's all kinds of stuff happening at the Union Buildings garden. People go and do gym there, and, you know, there are political rallies move through there. So I think the engagement is there, but how to open it up further and bring politics closer to people who have a say, clearly from the response in our exhibition, but there isn't a sort of place where you can leave your opinion. And I think that could be an interesting place to leave your opinion. I don't know. What do you think, Gord?
I think for me it's a bit more difficult to think of an intervention, because intervention, yes, I was introduced to the project through the research, and I went there, but I'm not South African. So I think the only thing I can do is, like, through the research and through being there, being informed about what people are thinking. And I think what was interesting is, like, people found the building very beautiful, and going there, as Kanzani said, the garden was a place that families went there for picnic, dates. But also, I think through the research, one of the comments that was the most striking to me was that person that said, they don't really know what's happening there. Why don't they just empty it so it can become their house? And also this raises an important question regarding understanding what's happening in that very important state building. And also questions around housing and having enough housing around. But again, this idea of transparency, I think for me is the most important. And we see archival pictures of the inside, so how come now it's not as accessible? So yeah.
Oh, Lois is going to add? And now I'll continue.
Okay, so I think for us as architects, from the beginning, we didn't want to impose our opinions on the people who would be attending the exhibition, because as much as we've read the research material, we may have different opinions of what we thought the interpretation of some of the buildings had been, and we wanted to leave that open for the participants. Through the research, I did visit the Osu Castle, even though it's in Accra and has been there. I didn't know it was accessible, because I knew the Jubilee House wasn't accessible to the public. So through the research, I wanted to have a feel of the castle myself, because I had heard the opinions of people from interviews we had done a year earlier who lived close to these buildings, what they thought of it, and how they thought the building of these structures could have been done. So yeah, our exhibition was more or less not to impose our opinions on anybody, but just to get more ideas from them. Yeah.
feel like we had one more question. I'll take two, and then I'll pass around. Yes, at the back, and then I'll come to you.
Hi. I'm also an architect and a designer. That's an architect and an academic, and maybe some other people are as well. But I'm very interested in something that, well, Julia said something, and also Nahum said something that made me quite interested. Firstly, Julia, you were saying that the interaction between the designers and curators and academics enriched the research. And Nahum, you were saying something about for architects or for projects about buildings, scale models, for example, are very important to communicate faithfully, or models are more faithful to the medium of architecture than text. It speaks of the buildings themselves. And I think that this aspect of what kind of method of making that knowledge is appropriate to the discipline is a very interesting one in this case. The topic is architecture, and in a way you're really looking for a medium for the production of that knowledge to be faithful to the topic and to speak the language of the subject matter that you're dealing with. And it seems to me that in this collaboration perhaps there's a dimension of practice research that comes at the intersection between the academic way of thinking and the designer way of thinking that creates a kind of a cycle which creates that enrichment. And maybe there's some tension between that process of dissemination, which the exhibitions are supposed to be doing, and embodiment of the knowledge that you're trying to produce. So this is kind of a comment, but I don't know if it sparks any responses. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I'll take another question, and then I'll go
Thank
into
you.
it.
I've learned so much. I really enjoyed this. I have two questions. One is for Kukwa. Your film Downstairs talks about the work that you did in Bandu and how the schools changed the students. And I wondered whether you found anything about whether the students physically shaped like the structure. So is it like, was the relationship in both directions, as in the school is shaping the students and the students are shaping the school such that it's not a purely colonial product? And my second question is, Lois has already answered this and it's related to what was previously asked, but it seems that it was, for all of you, the focus was on getting people to engage and react to your designs, but did you have at any point a message that you wanted to communicate? Did you want people who engage with the work to come out of it with anything?
Thank you. So we'll start with the first question. I wonder, Julia, do you want to have a go at answering that first? I saw nods.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I mean, I am not an architect. I'm the only person who's not an architect. And so I turned this into a virtue. I tried to. And I said, well, what I'm interested in is how non-architects, how citizens read these buildings and how they understand the politics of them, or how they read the politics in the buildings. And so, like many non-architects, I personify buildings, and I don't know the proper terms to use to describe the structures, and I don't understand the techniques and the materials and so on. But I've learned a lot as I've gone, and I think one of the things. So I had a real prejudice against models. Because I thought architects' models, and I actually still think this, to be fair, and I'm not talking about your models because yours weren't like this. But you know, when you have these sort of beautiful models that show the building, I mean, I'm sure they're all done to scale, and you look down on them like you're a bird or you're like your God. And I thought that's not how I ever experience buildings, especially not state buildings. I look up at them and I feel scared, or I feel intimidated, or I feel impressed. And I see them in bits and I don't understand how they work, and I'm not trying to dissect them. I'm trying to sort of get my head around them. And I think, actually, I've learned from the way that you all interpreted your exhibitions that actually you were doing the same sorts of things. You didn't present them as somehow sort of dissected and picked apart and understood and grasped. Actually, all of them, whether sort of the fragments of the South African one, the sort of the lack of clarity and the different perspectives on the Ghanaian one, or the invisibility of the Ethiopian one, all of you actually, and I don't know whether that's because architects do that or whether it's because you were thinking with different hats on and you were looking at them from different perspectives, or you were reflecting the research, or what it was, but you all did that but you did it in a physical way, which I had not been able to do because I use words. And I don't know whether, I think that's been one of the things that's most struck me as a revelation, and maybe I find it difficult to put it into words because I'm thinking about the pictures now and the images, and maybe that's always going to be a problem about the translation backwards and forwards. But I want to be able to, in my writing, when I write about these buildings, convey how it feels to look at them and feel about and sort of walk around them, or avoid them because they're scary, or feel frightened because of the history and the ghosts inside them and so on. And I think that when I do that, and I try and do that, I think I will find myself summoning up the imagery that you provided, and I'm going to do that explicitly, and I think that will give me a new range of thinking about it. Yeah.
Thank you, and I'll... Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah. Just a brief idea on your comment. As you can imagine, the end product of architecture is usually material, be it a building, or a home or a space. That's material. And with this project, with the invisibility thing, we were trying to dematerialize the experience so that it creates a kind of engagement using this augmented reality and 2D animations. Because with this, still on a typical exhibition, you can go and you still see materials, be it a painting or a kind of a statue, still that's something material. But with this, we want to create a kind of a space where it feels there is nothing, but everything is there. So just to dematerialize the thing and to put a boundary in between the influence the material can put on the idea and the idea can the influence that the idea can put on the material. So people are purely engaging with the original idea in a way that needs their doing something. So that's one thing. And I think with your question, I want it's also more of I think expectation that the project, there are some ideas which were very profound, but with the interpretation we got from Addis Abeba, most of the ideas were related to the African Union, because people have this reserved observation and comment on the building. And at the same time, there were many buildings which I really would like to pull out, because when it comes to architecture and politics, the church has a very important role. So we tried to include the Lalibela Rocking Church with the exhibition, but at the same time, there are some, parish churches like the St. George Cathedral, Aksum Zion, which have a very strong relation with state power, because almost before this secular, governance of state came to practice, state and religion were identical. They were like face of a coin. So you can't detach it. At some point, the state is the church and the church is the state. So it could have been better if we can pull out some more, more of these programs to understand from this African politics viewpoint. So that was.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry if that's wrong.
Yes. Do we have a hard stop for 6:30? Yeah.
Yeah, we need to get downstairs and have a drink.
Yeah.
We can go on talking
A quick point, and then I'll pass to.
So with regard to what you said about if there were messages from the participants, one thing I realized from the comments which were left was the view of politics in Ghana is very generation specific. So a building like the Jubilee House, which is a state building, people interacting with the images and text on how it was built, the younger people were only looking at the fact that it looked like a stool and it was nice, like this is nice architecture. But then if you read comments from much older people, they were looking at it in the light of corruption, considering it wasn't built by Ghanaians and it was built by like a foreign power. So like those messages of people's perception of the buildings based on their ages was something which I found interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'll pass it on to Kukwa to answer the question about school children. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because there was the students trying to shape their space and use it in different ways. So one of the tools I used in my research was walks through the school where I had them tell me about different spaces, how they used it, how they felt about them. So just one example was the walls, which to the teachers were enclosing spaces that the students were not allowed to breach. And for the students, they were pathways to escape the school. So the boys would be like, oh yes, this is how we get to this part of town. This is how we get to that part of town. And interestingly, the male students policed the female students. They stopped them from escaping the school, even though they did. So they used it in ways that the authorities, the teachers didn't know. And they sort of replicated like just gender dynamics in the way they transform the space as just a quick example of that. I think that was the only question for me, right?
Yes. There was a chance for Kinsani and Ord, if you wanted to answer that question about the message. Was there a message that you wanted to also give out? Yeah. Ord.
I think one aspect of the exhibition was breaking away from hierarchy between the art piece and the people that went to visit the exhibition, but it's even more powerful when we talk about state buildings. And it was a way for us to, I don't like the word giving power, but like reveal power, like reveal something and people being able to shift narrative, especially with such important and like heavy topics, I think.
I think to add on to what Ord mentioned, I think that one of we also tried not to personalize ourselves in the material, the output, but one of the things that I think was really important to us was to allow people to recognize themselves as being authors of architecture, like the use of these buildings, the disobedient use of these buildings, the how people behave in these buildings determines the value of them and determines the future of them to a large extent. And so I think that was, I think one of the things that we really tried to instill by also, if people didn't respond, just being asked a question about architecture and not being a quote unquote, architect, puts you in the position of thinking as a designer, thinking as an author. And I think that relates to the comment that was brought up earlier in relation to this kind of sort of intersection between design and research, or design and academia. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why matriarchy exists, is because we were incredibly frustrated. I remember in 2017 starting this thing, like incredibly frustrated with the harsh binaries between these disciplines, A, and B, not being able to talk to my mother about architecture, or not having an answer to what is your favorite African architect, or what is your favorite African architecture. And I think in order for that to become a more intersectional practice, conversations or dialogues with the public are imperative. And I think that's kind of one of the things that really excited us when we were making this exhibition, How could you then take those books at a later stage and allow that to inform sorts of renovations or new developments, restorations of those buildings. That could be an interesting resource.
Also, one last thing, and also do the same with other building in other countries in Africa, and then like what will be the archive that will come from that is also a very exciting idea.
Wonderful. Is there a burning question that anyone has that can be answered very quickly? At the back, yes?
It might be a bit long, but just in my work, like with affordable housing in the US, I've encountered a lot of NIMBYism.
What was that?
Like NIMBYism, like people who are like older. The girl who talked a bit about like the age difference and how people respond to buildings. I was wondering if there's like this like sort of like conservative anti-developmental mentality you encounter, or any of you encounter in your work, because it's pretty strong in the US right now towards like development.
Thank you. So we don't have much time, so I might just limit it to maybe a quick answer. Koko, do you want to have a go?
Okay. So yeah, I don't think this applies more to the exhibition, but to this research. So NIMBY is not in my backyard. So like when you're trying to do housing or something, and there's like people who own property, prevent it from happening because on paper they're for development, but it's not in their backyard. So it's a bit different across different African countries because like ruling elites sometimes are invested in the development projects. Either their companies are contracting, sometimes they are architects for this building. So the motivations are different in different sort of things. So in Ghana, maybe we have a reverse of that, where like forest reserves are being targeted for development into amusement parks and restaurants. So it's, I guess, reverse. It's like, yes, in my forest reserve backyard. So it's different, but I would assume it's different in South Africa, where there's like kind of more established elite areas where people do not want to have public housing. Yeah, some extent in Kenya, I would expect this happening as well, but in West Africa, not so much. It's happening. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Well, I'll bring it to a close, and I'll just say thank you very much for joining us here to be a part of this discussion and the tail end of this wonderful big project. There's been so many interesting insights, and I love the fact that an exhibition has brought designers and architects together. Please join us afterwards for drinks. I'll be in the Brunei Gallery, it's just downstairs, where you can ask any more questions as well and develop these conversations. I certainly have quite a few now left to ask as well. All right, thank you. If you could just all join me in thanking everyone.